Kia ora, good evening. Welcome to the Guerin Report, and thanks for taking time out of your Monday night to join us. Big show tonight because last week the board of New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing took the recommendations from the Jumps Racing Review panel to continue jumps racing in New Zealand for at least the next 3 years, but with an annual review. Bruce Sharrock is the Chief Executive of New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing. He is here to talk to us tonight about this and other subjects. Good evening to you, Bruce.
Good evening, Mick. Pleasure to be here.
Mate, since we last saw you, we'll get to it quickly. You, after you last spoke to us, you then stood down from your position at New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing. How are you doing, and what are you going to do with yourself?
Yeah, look, I did. I sort of knew that well before talking to you, Mick, and I felt that I should have told you, but I thought I'd do the right thing and let the right process take place. Look, it was in the pot for some time, and personally for me 24 has been a big year, and it's about time to rebalance and reprioritise life, and I'm going to do that in 25 and looking forward to it.
You're heading out on a high of the whole range of information, a wonderful summer ahead of us, but we're here to talk business, and firstly the business of jumps racing. Why or what were the key factors in saving jumps racing in New Zealand, the decision made after a recommendation by the board of NZTR last week?
Yeah, look, even before I go there, Mick, I think it's important to acknowledge the panel. We thought the process was pretty robust that we put together. Firstly, you know, to Mark Chitty, Regan Donnison, Jess Brosnan, Brad Taylor, Tim Mills. I thought we assembled a group of people that were balanced in their approach, and I'd like to thank them for their time and input. Also to Darren Balcom, our COO, he did a fantastic job chairing it, and Amy Carter actually, who works closely with Darren to pull it all together. So, and finally Alan Galbraith, he gave us the legal overview. So I think the process was as thorough as it could be, and pretty happy with the way that we went about it. So
I think it surprised a few people because the chat, and racing has a lot of chat, 6 months ago and 3 months ago was they're going to get rid of jumps racing. This is a waste of time, this panel. When I saw the panel, I thought, no, this isn't a waste of time. So congratulations on having a balanced panel. What did they recommend, and why did the board of NZTR agree with them?
Yeah, look, there's a number of factors, Mick, and it was never a straightforward conversation or decision to make. And to that point, I mean, I recall on a couple of road shows where I was effectively asked and tested, you know, why are you going through this when you know what the outcome is? I would never do that. I'm the sort of person that if I have a decision to make, will make it based on the facts we have. I felt it needed consultation. I felt that we needed to go through a process. And, you know, ultimately we've landed where we have. To go back to your question, there's probably 3 or 4 key areas that drove the decision in favour of retention. Participant overall, I mean, if we look at the people involved in jumps racing, and I think we all kind of knew this anecdotally heading into it, is just the width in which they contribute outside of just jumps. You know, you've got people who are educating horses, you've got people who are riding difficult horses, track work, you've got people who are starter gate people. So at the end of the day, we looked at how hard it would be if we removed jumps racing from the ecosystem for those people to stay full-time in our industry. That was one factor. Welfare was big, and by that I mean horse welfare. I mean, there is a second career for a select group of horses that get into jumps racing. Rehoming our horses is a massive challenge globally, and it's a massive challenge here in New Zealand. And what this clearly does is gives a set number of horses a second career. And what further to that, when a horse completes its jumping career, it's a lot easier to be rehomed with a background in jumping. It makes it way more attractive to a rehomer in various ways. And look, history, I think history was a large part of it. It came through strongly that this is part of the fabric of racing in New Zealand, and probably deserved the opportunity to see if it could reinvigorate itself. That was a big part. But ultimately the people spoke. You know, we went out and people submitted. We had 256 submissions. Probably 90% of those were about retaining jumps racing. We had to petition 3 different petitions, but about 1,970 signatures. And they were all about retention. So the people spoke. And if there is a silent majority sitting out there, they didn't speak. And so that's what consultation's about. And ultimately, that's where we've landed with a whole lot of various, what I'm terming KPIs, or a framework wrapped around it to go forward.
How close was the vote at board level for this to be going ahead?
It really didn't get to a vote, Mick. I mean, at the end of the day, the board had the paper presented to them. They clearly had an opportunity to read it before the board meeting, so there were some pretty direct questions around certain parts of it. But I think it was a unanimous feeling that this is what the industry needs to give jumps racing. And I look at it in a really positive way. This is about trying to reinvigorate jumps racing again and bring it back to the heights. I mean, when I was a young fella, you know, walking around with Baggy Hillis and the days in which he was riding Brockton over the hurdles and all the rest of that stuff. I mean, that's where it needs to get back to, but we need the people to stand up and bring it forward again.
I believe there's going to be a smaller annual review, but after 3 years, a bigger review. What are the KPIs? I'm not a corporate speak man, but what are the key things you're going to be looking at for jumps racing to improve on to continue to have a future?
Yeah, look, and going back to your annual review, that's something Victoria did, and we had dialogue with Victoria on a couple of occasions at length with them because they're facing similar challenges, whether or not, you know, jumps racing survives in Victoria. So look, the annual review is really going to be looking at the KPIs that we set, and I'll get to those in a second. But the 3-year strategic review is more about, does it fit where we're going as a business? Because if I go right back to the start, and what we measured this whole thing on was aligning it to the strategic plan that we put in place earlier this year, which rolls on for 4 years. So we had to align it to make sure that it sits within where racing in New Zealand wants to go and needs to go. And on balance, it does. It didn't tick every box. One of the key strategic pillars for us is revenue. It doesn't tick that at the moment. You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't stand up alone as an economic product for us. We think it can improve. We've spoken to Entain. They think it can improve, but we need to work together to make that happen. So look, the areas that we really want to focus on to give it every chance to reinvigorate itself and get back to its halcyon days, it's people, jockeys. We need to get a greater pool of jockeys. We're looking to implement in February an elite jockey program for our apprentices. We want to introduce jumps racing as part of that for young apprentices. Why? Because one, they'll be exposed to it, and if flat riding doesn't work out for them, there is an alternative for them later on in their careers. They get to understand it, and they get to understand what it's all about from a very young age. That's one of the things. We want to link in with other jurisdictions. We've spoken to Victoria about aligning our calendars to make sure that if there is an opportunity to use jockeys across the ditch to come here. We've also spoken at a pretty high level to the likes of the Irish racing jurisdiction as well. And looking at those sorts of people, you know, it's outside of their season. Can we bring them in to make sure that we've got, one, more jockeys, which again, ironically, make it more economical because we're not having to split fields and double up on stakes, which is a drain.
Sorry to interrupt, isn't there a situation though where some of the Australian jockeys coming across wouldn't have the long-term insurance that they would have in their own country, and therefore you break an arm, you don't have the income coming in because they're not covered under our ACC? Is that a rough understanding of how that works?
100% correct, and that's always been the prohibitive thing to getting them across. So
how do we fix that?
Yeah, so look, part of the conversation, and I'll take credit for the idea, and back in the footy days we talk about this, it's about self-insuring. So you look at the risk you're exposed to, they still qualify for their long-term health and other issues that could come as an injury here. But it's the first 13 odd weeks that they wouldn't get any cover. So look, we'll look to explore self-insuring. So in other words, there'll be a minimum that we can offer these people to come across. We'll cover them for up to 13 weeks at a guaranteed weekly rate, and then they can kick on to their other insurance should it be such a severe injury that they need to dovetail back into the Australian.
So just for people watching who don't understand self-insuring, because I'm learning about it with the thoroughbreds as well, that would mean you guys putting a little bit of money aside into a pool. If somebody is unfortunate enough to break an arm and cannot ride, you will pay them out at least a minimum what they would get normal wage for that 13 months.
Correct, and we did some rough numbers at a high level. It's not a huge amount of money. It could be $100,000 sitting there as your worst exposure year on year. So, at the end of the day, it's one of those things, if we can bring the jockeys across and give them the comfort that they do have that minimum level of cover, then I can only see that being a good thing. We've
only just had this decision last week, Bruce. What do we think a jumps racing season is going to look like? Because I'm hearing maybe a later start. The firmer tracks are hard on numbers and hard to prepare horses. One of the key things I thought of straight away is, will we still have the Grand National Carnival?
Yeah, look, and all of that is in the mix. And let me just frame up what the KPIs look like. By March, the end of March, the team at NZTR will come up with those. They've put in 19 recommendations, and then it's about implementing those and putting some detail to them. To touch on your first point, yeah, look, and I think that will be the one that'll come out. There's a dates committee meeting on the 11th of December, and Darren will probably come out of that with some advice to the jumps fraternity as to when jumping will start in season 24-25. What has come through is that we're possibly starting too early. The tracks are still too firm in May, and we may need to push it back. So that will probably be the first thing that comes out, and will probably come out before Christmas. But then after that, they'll look to work around all of the others. You've talked about venues. Look, the other thing that's come out clearly is let's put the racing on at the venues that are suitable to jumping, where the horses are, where the people are, and really try and make it, I guess, economic for everybody. And but that's clubs as well, because what we don't want to be doing is towing around jumps from track to track. It's just not efficient, it's not economical, and it's really hard work.
So say, for example, because I know Sunday is being targeted potentially as a jumping day, which means we can keep Saturday as a flat day, ties in nicely to Australia. On a Sunday, if we race, I'll pull a track out of my head, Trentham. Trentham, we race on a Sunday, we'll race again there 2 or 3 weeks later, so at least there's some consistency of form of horses racing at Trentham over their style of jumps. Is that how we can best economically package that?
Yeah, you absolutely. And I think the other one is shaping the racing, the races and the calendar, so that our better horses are kind of competing against each other more often through the season. Rather than waiting for the big finale. We've had 2 champions of recent time come together once at the end of the year. I think the fan wants to see it more often. So some innovation around that as well. I mean, the likes of Tiaroa. I mean, you know, Tiaroa was invested in by ATR, was invested in by NZTR and by Tiaroa itself. It should be jump central. You know, we're going to talk about, you know, can we create a Warrnambool 2-day carnival at the end, a final series, and, you know, really bring the community of Tiaroa along for a ride with us. So those sorts of things have to start being considered.
Who's the onus on here? NZTR obviously are the overlords of programming and making all this work and supporting it with facilities and training. The TAB and Entain are the people who are in charge of the betting and effectively this television channel, so therefore that level of promotion. But the jumps industry have maybe the obligation or even the responsibility of getting more people involved, keeping more horses involved, and trying to lure those overseas jockeys. Who's the onus on here to make this work?
Yeah, look, I think you've covered that really well. I mean, the reality is, if this is going to work, there has to be a collaborative approach, and if we all start looking sideways and pointing fingers, we'll go back to where we are. The short version is that NZTR has a responsibility to put on the calendar and the programming and make sure the infrastructure is up to standard, etc. So they will do that, they will own that. Clearly they need to speak to those that are in the game that ensure that those decisions have been well thought out. But when it comes to rallying around to ensure we're getting the horses in, we're getting the participant and jockeys in, the jumps fraternity need to stand up and take some ownership here and really come forward and say, look, we really want to bring this back to where it once was. So I think, you know, they need to also stand up, and if that means that they've got to form a group that advocates every year to ensure that we're on top of it, collaboration is our future. If we're not doing it, it's going to make it really hard.
Knowing what you know now, with all the opinions, but also the economic data, which many people watching this show don't get, including myself, if this was your decision, what would you have decided?
Look, you know, I think on balance, I mean, and I made this public as well, I mean, I've had a family that have, you know, won a Northern. I came up or grew up around it, so I had a view, a personal view, that it's a great thing, it's a great spectacle, it's part of our fabric. However, in the role that I'm in, I have to look at the economics. I have to look at does it fit racing and where it needs to go for its next generation, which is largely the focus that I've always had in this role, setting this up for the next generation. And on basic economics, it was struggling. It was really struggling. So through this process, it opened up, I guess, from a weighting perspective, that taking into account the things I said a few minutes ago, it probably did deserve an opportunity, and it's got its opportunity.
Would you have given it one?
Based on the first information, no. I think if you had to ask me outright where I sat with it, economically, I found it really difficult. Commercially, it didn't stand up, and the other risks associated to it. So again, for me, it shows value in process. And what I will say, I've always remained and always will remain open-minded to things. I'm open to opinions, I'm open to knowledge, data, and it can change any man's opinion. And you know, it changed mine. And I was never going to make a unilateral decision. The board would never allow it.
Your best guess, will this work? In 5 years, will we have a sustainable, high-quality jumping product in this country?
Yeah, look, I think there's two parts to that, Mick. I think the first part is if the jumps fraternity, really rally and start to build internal succession plans, because let's face it, there are a number of older trainers particularly who are dominating the sport, and they're amazing horse people, but they're not going to be with us forever. We need to make sure that there is a succession plan in place, and that's up to them. That's not up to us. So we need to ensure that the returns from jumping are there for people to want to engage and invest in it. So I think that's one part. The other part, and let's not dismiss the fact, we've had conversations with Victoria. If Victoria decide that jumps racing doesn't survive over there, that means it's not in Australia. That will mean that we're the only jurisdiction in the Southern Hemisphere that has jumps racing. That will be a challenge, and I'm not saying this is hinged on their decision, but what I am saying is we need to be mindful of what that does to the ecosystem if across the ditch we don't have anybody participating either. Because part of the growth plan is aligning more with them and trying to engage them, whether it's a Trans-Tasman jockey series, whether we try and get some horses across for a final, all of that sort of stuff is going to be discussed, and I think could play a part in really raising the profile of it.
Thanks for the transparency around that subject. Let's move on to venues. The most recent venue of discussion, of course, is Hastings and Hawke's Bay Racing. People keep telling me, I have no idea whether this is true, but I'm going to ask you, are Hawke's Bay Racing broke?
It depends what you term broke. Their balance sheet's extremely strong. They've got a freehold piece of land. They're probably worth 40, 45 million, maybe even 50 million.
In that case, they're okay.
They're okay.
They just need some cash flow.
They've got a cash flow issue, and largely that, I mean, I think we all accept the fact that the carnival for Hawke's Bay probably produces up to 70% of their revenue for the year. Now, unfortunately, the incident we had at Arrowfield Day meant that we didn't go ahead with Livermore Day, which is their biggest. So that has put cash flow pressure on them. I mean, as of yesterday, I had my head of finance and their people combing through a very detailed cash flow that will be presented to myself and others on Monday, and we'll have a very clear picture of what that looks like before we make some other decisions as well.
What happens there? Do we need to recamber that track? Do you continue to race there on the current track, which would seem maybe repeating the same process we've been through, which didn't work? Or are they realistically looking at buying another piece of land and building a new track? What's in play here?
Yeah, look, a really good question, Mick, and I think that was probably the confusing thing for the club. And if, you know, I went down there last Wednesday and sat with their board and actually went and met council and got a pretty good overview of what's going on. Look, I think the confusion lay from the outset was whether or not they were relocating or whether or not they were staying put. The consensus is they're staying put, and the venue that they're at, which is an ideal place in the middle of Hastings, is the location of the future. What has to happen now is building a master plan that aligns with NZTR's master plan. Because I think, you know, as you've seen with the fantastic work that WTR have done, we've had a seat at that table, we've understood every step of the way what's going on, it fits into what we're thinking. What we need to do though is build out a 10 to 20 year vision for the industry around all our metros, our provincials, our country, so everybody's clear as to what it's going to look like and what part they're playing in it. And look, for us, Hawke's Bay, we've given them the assurance that we see them as a strategic venue going forward, but we need to see a venue that stands up to the metro status that it will be given.
So, including recambering that bend, work down the back straight, that type of thing?
100%. Look, there's two parts. If we stay in this well, there's two parts. We believe that if we can get them back racing by recambering, we've got to get two things. We've got to get the industry's confidence that we've done enough work there that we're not going to have the failures that we've consistently had over recent years. That's the first thing. We need to ensure that the health and safety side of this is up to standard and we're not walking into, I mean, we saw this week, which was a terrible thing, a CE of a company was basically fined for the death of a worker. So this health and safety thing is real and we need to be very, very aware of it. So we need to make sure those and the RIB are also comfortable with the work we've done. What having done right at the moment is what it will cost for us to recamber, because it appears that that is the major issue. Now that isn't the future, that is to get us through for the next probably 3 years while a really detailed master plan is put together and presented to NZTR and gets approval for it. Look, ATR started this, it took them 2 years to come up with their master plan and what they're doing. You've now seen with WTR, that's 18 months of work, a hell of a lot of expertise, outside consultants helping people pull these together. These aren't the back of envelope discussions that all of a sudden you come up with, hey, guess what, why don't we do this? No more. This has to be a well thought out process and plan, and that's what we've challenged the board at Hawke's Bay to do, and they're up for it. They've made significant change in their board composition in the last 2 weeks, and there's some very, very capable people now on that board, and we will also want to be beside them for a ride.
So Hawke's Bay Racing will continue at the current Hastings venue. Is that what you're telling me?
That is the plan today. The caveat I put on that, I've got people looking at the cost of recambering, because if it's going to cost too much, we're going to say, well, we have to actually just reconstruct now and find the funding for that. I believe, my early indications are that we will be able to do the recambering and the remediation work that's required to meet to the satisfaction of those I spoke of earlier. And if we do that, we're talking probably 6 months. They'll be back racing. That allows them some cash flow. That allows, to me, it's a win-win. They win, the industry wins. We have another venue that is performing well again. Let's not forget, day one of that carnival performed outstandingly. However, got exposed on day two.
One of the more intriguing and valuable racing facilities in the country is Avondale. Where do we stand with which, I know this is a very emotional conversation for people at the club and I respect their history and their love for the precinct. Where do we stand with Avondale at this moment?
Yeah, look, and happy to talk about it, because on the 21st of October there was a members forum, and a members forum where they effectively voted to progress or not with an MOU. So if you wind the clock back 12 months or so, I've had a subcommittee and we've been working closely with Avondale to construct an MOU. And for your viewers, all that basically means, a memorandum of understanding, is creating a framework that when we get to the commercial side of it, these are the things that we will be looking at and trying to achieve to reach an agreement to transfer the land to NZTR. That was what that was about.
So that would mean, just to paraphrase for people at home, eventually, if Avondale is sold to be developed, I presume, that means at least the bulk of that money would go to NZTR for the betterment of New Zealand thoroughbred racing. Is that basically the understanding?
Fundamentally, there are really three aspects of it. The industry, NZTR. You know, I've always made this distinction, Mick. I think people get hooked up on the fact they think NZTR is going to squirrel it away, and yes, past behaviours may say they've wasted, even though it was a different structure under New Zealand Racing Board. But the fact of the matter is it's money for industry. That's the first thing. The second thing is community. So under the Act, we have to recognise community, and community are and need to be a beneficiary of this in some way, shape or form. So that's part of the MOU as well. And then thirdly is the club themselves, and most importantly, the club themselves. They want a legacy, they're not about to disappear, and we want them to be part of the fabric of our club network going forward. So those three aspects have to be woven into an agreement, which ultimately sees everybody happy, and then a transfer can take place. That is what we're going to be working on over the next 6 months with Avondale. Our first meeting is next Wednesday, the 4th. So we'll sit down and start thrashing out some of the key aspects. So we are making progress, and as I say, I was really buoyed and encouraged. I think there were 43 financial members that turned up to that meeting, which was a really good turnout for them. 35 of them voted that we should continue on and explore this. So I really think that the member base is seeing it for what it is. It's about enhancing New Zealand racing and the part they can play in it. So I really do hope that we can find a way forward.
This may be the last time we have you on the Guerin Report as the boss of NZTR. Personally, I would like to thank you for your transparency, but also for the work you do and the 100 phone calls a day, which I sure as hell wouldn't want to take. If you had a magic wand, if you could change one thing heading forward for New Zealand racing with all the knowledge you have now, what would you like to see the industry do?
That's a really big question, and I mean, my immediate answer goes to, I would just encourage our participant groups to always apply a lens of what's best for racing. As I said right from the get-go, you know, parochialism is a good thing when it's measured, but when it paralyses progress, it effectively prevents us from getting to where we need to get to. So yeah, my encouragement to industry participants is say, look, whilst that may not suit me 100%, I understand the rationale behind it and the fact that the industry as a whole is prospering, because fundamentally, my role I've always seen is about setting this industry up for the next generation, not me. It's for the kids, the grandkids that everybody has out there, so that they can enjoy what I enjoyed. I talked earlier about getting dragged along to the races with the Baggy Hillises of the world. That's what I want to see them enjoying, not a really marginalised sport that exists in about 4 centres around the country, because that's what it, you know, that's what it could shrink to. It needs to grow, it can grow, the financial base is there now. Entain has been a breath of fresh air and given the oxygen that the industry needed. We have assets that are starting to be optimised, there is a plan. Fundamentally, we're heading in the right direction, I firmly believe it. We just need people to start pulling the rope in the same direction.
There is a massive summer of racing ahead, with Champions Day going to be huge, obviously the NZB Kiwi, many other positive things, almost weekly over the next 4 months. Are you looking forward to summer of racing? Does a job like the Chief Executive, does it take the joy out of racing, or are you now, as you're about to leave that role, looking forward to going to the races and enjoying what should be one of our great summers?
Yeah, look, and touch on that. It will be one of our great summers, if not the greatest summer. And so as a fan of racing, I look forward to enjoying it with my mates, sitting there having a beer, I guess throwing a few expletives at what didn't get up and what should have got up.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, look, and I guess that, you know, in the role, everybody's got a view, and I know that's just part of it. But yeah, for now, it's probably about enjoying it. And as I say, my good friends are calling me Casper the Ghost. No one's seen me in 2 years, so I need to get back in touch with those sort of people and start enjoying life.
Well, Casper, thank you for coming in and talking to us. Thanks for all your work as the boss of NZTR, and it's a fascinating time. You've helped to get us this far. It's now up to us to continue further. That was Bruce Sharrock. Thank you for watching the Guerin Report. We really appreciate his time. We appreciate yours, of course, too. And we have plenty more great subjects coming up over the summer, but hopefully that's updated you on your industry. The Guerin Report will be back next Monday at 8 p.m. here on Trackside.